talk about what's going on right here, right now in Watertown. And so tonight we're going to have a local community member share his story. We have our panel of experts here that are going to share what they're seeing going on in their field of work. And then we're going to open it up for you guys to ask questions. At your tables, I do have some sticky notes, so if you don't feel comfortable asking the questions yourselves, you can write that down, and I'll have people who will be walking around, or if you raise your hand, we can grab those from you as well. To kick off the evening, I'm going to show a brief introductory of a video called Chasing the Dragon. And I'm going to show about 7 minutes of it, but it's just going to kind of give us an introduction as to why we're here tonight.
I'm Chuck Rosenberg. I run the Drug Enforcement Administration.
We're talking to you today because we are facing a crisis that is killing far too many people: prescription drug and heroin abuse.
Each year, more than 46,000 people die from a drug overdose. That's more people than die from car accidents or from gun violence, and half of those 46,000 deaths are related to opioid abuse.
We thought the best approach would be to let you hear the truth. No filter, no censors, just the straight facts from people who have lived with the hard consequences of opioid abuse. You're going to watch unscripted interviews that include some raw emotion and some profanity. You're going to witness real tragedy and learn what happens when drugs take hold of real people and don't let go. You will see that those whose lives are taken over by drug addiction are often kids from stable homes with strong families. Good people who had great childhoods, were given everything they wanted, and had everything going for them. But they took one wrong turn and they were hooked. And once you're hooked, it is so very hard to get off these drugs, and the spiral down is so quick.
After you watch this film, we want you to talk about it. We want you to talk to your parents, to your relatives, to your friends, to your brothers and sisters. If you know somebody who's using drugs or even thinking about using drugs, say something.
You're going to see that once the addiction starts, it is often too late. By telling somebody, you could be saving a life.
I didn't care. I didn't think about it. I just did it. Once we started getting high, it was done.
She was 17 years old, and the only way I knew about it is because she was arrested.
Started smoking pot around 18, and I was always offered prescription drugs, and I never would take them. Then I was in a car accident.
I was running down in the middle of the night to get some water, fell down the stairs, landed on my back on the wooden floor.
It started for me with pot and just progressed into hell, basically.
Weed didn't do it for me, but definitely weed started it all for me.
It was definitely something I didn't see until it was too late. I had no clue what I was getting myself into, so.
Started taking 3 at a time, and then I was taking 4 at a time, and then I started taking
I became
6
addicted
at a
that day.
time.
When you're getting high, it's not just a drug.
You're hooked. $500 going into
And she was a convicted felon at the age of 18.
I had maggots in my leg.
Turned to prostitution.
Stealing from my family.
Married, mother of 3, and I'm
They're gonna
stripping.
take you to hell and back.
It's not just a little pill.
Takes control of you.
I started using heroin.
The same heroin that just killed
You
me.
can't go back and say I'm sorry.
It will win.
It will get you.
Her sister found her.
Died in her sleep.
My daughter.
She was dead.
Being addicted to opiates is like chasing a dragon. You're constantly seeking that first high. But what's going to happen if you actually catch it?
great family, you know, always had what I wanted. Never had a curfew. I could sleep over at my friend's house whenever. I could have done anything. They would have paid for me to go to any kind of school, stuff like that, and any kind of, they paid for guitar lessons.
I grew up with my dad. My mom wasn't in my life, though. He pretty much was mom and dad throughout the whole life. He would tutor me for at least an hour. On the weekends, we'd go out, we'd go camping, we'd go out on the boats. We always had something planned.
She started in gymnastics when she was like a toddler, and she was a cheerleader through middle schools, high schools, and she was also a competitive cheerleader. She started competing probably in 7th grade. She was a very good student. She was in AP classes, AP honor roll.
Worked myself up through the years with minimal college to a position. I worked as a corporate account executive. I was making about an average of $122,000 a year. Things were pretty good financially. We were secure. Kids were happy. We had no real issues.
Dad was military, mom was Korean. Everyone I grew up with was the same way. Everyone's parents was military and Korean parents, Korean mom. No, I did martial arts, ballet, gymnastics, did all kinds of stuff. I did piano lessons. I was an honor roll student, always went to school. I was like 3.43, grade point average.
I had a great childhood, great family. We did a lot of camping, a lot of fun stuff, going to the beach, camping at the beach. Very active in scouting, Boy Scouts, and something my father, me and him did together. You know, a couple days before my 18th birthday, I actually got my Eagle Scout, which was a big accomplishment for me.
I met my first husband when I was very young. I was 13. And then we got married at 17. So I got to grow up pretty quick. I was 22 years old, and that's when everything started. I got pregnant with my youngest daughter. Once I had her, they gave me Oxycontins. That was the pain medicine. And from then on, that's where my addiction started.
Okay. So that's just to kind of give us a little introduction of tonight. What I'd like to do now is just think about how many of us could probably relate to someone like the individuals we just saw in the video. No one's intent is to become an addict. And that's why we're here tonight, to be proactive and to have a discussion of what's going on in our community and talk about what we can do to keep our community safe. I'd like to introduce our speaker for tonight. His name is Lucas. He is a lifelong South Dakotan. Like many in the community, he was raised by a great family in a small town, similar to what we just saw in the video. He was active in sports and in his church. None of the so-called telltale signs of future substance abuse was present. In fact, he had never seen marijuana until after high school. Growing up, he couldn't fathom why anyone would ever use drugs, let alone continue to use them when the destruction in their lives was evident, until he found himself addicted to prescription painkillers, afraid and unable to stop. In his 10 years of sobriety, he has found happiness beyond his wildest dreams, a loving wife, 2 amazing children, close relationships with friends and family, and most importantly, freedom. Freedom is the physical sense, and in the spiritual sense, as the saying goes, the truth will set you free. I'd like to introduce Lucas.
As Kelly had mentioned, my name is Lucas, and I am an addict. Thank you to everyone for being here, Human Service Agency and Y, and everyone who's helped put this on. As she had mentioned, I've had 10 years of sobriety, May 27th of this past year. And it was around the time that that meth forum was held here. And I thought, you know, it's 10 years that I've been sober, doing really, really well. And I really haven't done what I should do to help give back to other people that I know are struggling out there. So I'm going to tell you my story. I'll do the best I can. I always write up a big outline, and about 2 sentences into it, I forget it. But so anyway, the first part I'd like to say is that addiction is addiction. I know when I went to treatment, a lot of times I was trying to compare myself to other people. You know, who'd done more for longer. Or, you know, they aren't an addict. They're only using marijuana. They've only been doing it 3 years. Well, you come to a realization that eventually addiction is straight up addiction. It's not a contest. You either are under the control of drugs or you are not. It'd be nice if there was a barometer that could tell us, but there isn't. I grew up, and I was going to say it was a Norman Rockwell childhood, but being here in South Dakota, it was a Terry Redland painting. I grew up out in the country on a farm with my parents, my little sister, the dogs, grandma and grandpa. Things were pretty wonderful. No issues. I got to spend as much time hunting and playing outside that I wanted to. Every summer we went to the Bighorn Mountains and fly fished. Things were smooth sailing. And I guess I grew up in the Just Say No era. How many of you guys remember Just Say No? All right, quite a few people. Now, bless Nancy Reagan's heart, but I'm not real convinced that people who are unfamiliar with drugs and alcohol addiction should be setting national policy. I remember once we had a speaker who had a little puppet, and the dad was real nice till he had a beer and turned it around and had a monster face on it. There was a poster that said 1 marijuana cigarette is equal to 120 regular cigarettes. I still don't know what that means, but the reason I bring that up, and I'll mention it again at the end, is we have to be honest about drugs and alcohol. We have to understand why people use them. And it's because it makes them feel better. It makes them feel good. It makes them feel powerful. And while that can be an appealing aspect, that doesn't last. So going back to my little town that I grew up in, there was no marijuana, but there was alcohol. Every day we'd go for football practice, be 3:30 in the afternoon, and I'd see the same vehicles at the bar. And I just couldn't fathom why. Why don't those guys just not go? Well, down the road I would come to figure that out. But active in sports, football, basketball, track, in the church, all my friends, you know, we did a little drinking, a little partying here and there, but when it came to drugs, wink, wink, we didn't do them. And one thing I learned about alcohol is that it was an escape. It was a way for me to do things and say things that, you know, I was maybe afraid to do or say, but under the influence of alcohol, it seemed to be excused. When I graduated high school, my plan was to attend Black Hills State University in Spearfish. I was going to get my degree in teaching, be back in 4 years to coach the kids in football that were in the 8th grade when I left. This is how close I was to my community. Part of my, I don't want to know, it wasn't part of my identity. Who I was wrapped up in where I was and with my family and with my friends. But as I left and went to college, I found myself alone. And I know it's not an uncommon feeling, but that's how it was for me. And I've always been, I guess, somewhat shy, and I was able to go out and talk to people and hang out and be funny. But I couldn't do it without help, so I would drink. And I'd come home on weekends and party with my friends, but it seemed like all my old high school buddies were talking about what they did last weekend when I wasn't there, or what they were going to do the following weekend when I wasn't going to be there. And I realized that ship had sailed, that I wasn't part of that group anymore, and that I was going to have to go out and find my own way. Well, as I got towards the end of the second semester at Black Hills State University, the friends that I'd been hanging out with smoked marijuana, and I'd been around it. I'd tried it a few times. I'd never gotten high until finally, that one time, it just hit me. I just remember thinking, why doesn't everyone do this all the time? I would wake up early in the morning, jump in my vehicle, skip class, and just drive through the Black Hills, smoke pot, and walk around. It wasn't the smartest thing to do, but I certainly enjoyed myself doing it. And then, of course, I got arrested for the first time. One of my good buddies was out of town. Another friend from Rapid City called and said, hey, come on down, we're gonna party here in Rapid. So I jump in my vehicle and I'm driving down the interstate and the lights turn on. And anyone who's ever been arrested for driving under the influence knows the fear. I mean, your heart is ready to leap out of its chest. And I remember talking to him, and I'm like, no, I'm not drinking. He's like, well, no problem. We'll get you on your way. Oh, can you do a breathalyzer for me? Well, 10 minutes later, I was in handcuffs, a bottle of alcohol sitting on top of the vehicle. And that was the first time. And fortunately, first offense went down to a reckless driving. So, you know, I didn't really have a problem. There was no driving under the influence. I was just being reckless. And going back to beginning drug use, I don't know what it was. I think curiosity played a big part of it. Maybe some of it was rebellion. But all I know is I tried marijuana, and within the month following, I'd also tried cocaine, mushrooms, LSD, and of course, prescription painkillers. I didn't know about prescription painkillers until I was in college. And a buddy of mine went to my aunt and uncle's place, and he pulled me aside. He said, did you see that on their fridge? And I said, uh-uh. Well, there's this big wicker basket just full of prescription bottles. I said, well, what do you want with that? He's like, well, there's something good in there. There's something good. I said, all right, well, what am I looking for? He said, you want something for pain. Painkillers are the ones that you want. Well, the next time I went, I asked my cousin, and he said, well, I don't know if there's any in there, but I have some for my surgery. So I took 2, and I guess I didn't really think too much about it. But I tell you what, the guys that I hung out with were certainly excited. I traded all those pills for marijuana, and everything was hunky-dory. Well, as you might imagine, as I'd mentioned, spending my time walking around the hills high, I didn't do too well in my classes. So I failed out of college and came back home. But I didn't want to be a part of that small community anymore, so I went to Brookings. And Brookings was a lot of fun. And like any college towns, it's, I guess there's an excitement about partying. So I got to be the cool guy. I had the fake ID, a girlfriend, and was just having fun. But this girlfriend I had, she was a small town girl herself. So I stopped using marijuana, but I continued to drink. And as time went on, you know, things fell apart there. I started using marijuana again. But throughout the whole period of this, there's always alcohol in the background. I was always drinking, and there was something about the prescription painkillers that had an allure. Every party I'd go to, I'd ask if someone had some. You know, I'd get my wisdom teeth pulled out so I could have some. And of course, once again, with my drinking and drug use, I was arrested for driving under the influence. But again, I was able to get that down to driving while drinking, underage, no DUI. And then a couple weeks later, no driver's license, but I was still able to drive because a piece of paper or plastic doesn't say what you can or can't do. Again, I was drinking. And the police officer pulled me over, gave me a breathalyzer, and I said I'd been drinking cough syrup. Now, I had no idea that would work. I think I'm one of 4 people in the history of the world to get out of drinking and driving because of cough syrup. But it wasn't true. And the thing I want you to pull away from this is the arrogance that comes with addiction and alcoholism. The thinking that you're special, that the rest of the world is a little bit below you. Because of who you are, it's okay to lie. It's okay to get away with these things. As things move forward down in Brookings, I hit the lottery. I don't know how or why, but I met a great girl, fell in love with her, and through everything, good, bad, and ugly, and there's been a lot of ugly that I put her through, she's still with me today. And we had a lot of friends and a lot of good times, and I almost am hesitant to say that because I don't want people to think that it's going to stay that way. So we'd all party hard and have fun and do our classes, and the difference was I was going to the doctor. The difference was I would drive 6 hours across the state of South Dakota out to Spearfish, sniff OxyContin for a weekend, and drive home. But I wasn't addicted. I didn't have a problem. And as time progressed, it was just more and more. I had to have those pills. And I've heard it a million times, but it bears repeating. Painkillers affect some people in wildly different ways. For myself, it was Superman. I would take a handful of Lortabs, and I'd go to the library, and I'd study for hours, reading Supreme Court briefs. I really wanted to be an attorney at that point in time in my life. And I just had these pills that made it that much better. Everyone else, they would take them to fall asleep. They didn't get the allure, which unfortunately usually only meant more for me. Another tragic incident happened, and again, it happens to a lot of people, but my grandfather died. Now, I said growing up on this farm was with my grandparents, and from the time I was little, I was in his back pocket the whole time. And he suddenly fell ill after a surgery, and I went to the hospital to see him, and he wasn't awake, and he died. And I knew he was going to die, and I'll never forget. It was Super Bowl Sunday. It was, I want to say it was the Panthers and Patriots, but the reason I remember is it was halftime, and the famous, or infamous, Janet Jackson incident happened. And I was downstairs on the phone talking to my mom. She'd informed me that, yes, Grandpa Don was gone. And it hurt really, really bad. I just remember my first instinct was I went and talked to my buddy's roommate who had a bottle of hydrocodone, and I took them, and it didn't hurt so bad anymore. And it went on and on like this. Still drinking marijuana, or still smoking marijuana all the time, but it was more and more doctor visits. More and more times I would go to student health. I would go into the regular clinic. And what I found, and I would spend hours on the internet researching pain, things to say, things not to say. Again, remember, I was smart. I was better than everyone else. So if I wanted it, I could get it. And sadly, I did, which only reinforced that what I was doing was okay. And while I was doing this, the signs were there. Sometimes a doctor would come in and say, you're awfully young to be using medication like this. And I would, kind of shrug and shake my head and say, boy, I wish it wasn't that way. I wish I didn't have to take these, but I can't sleep without them. I can't go to work without them. Now, I'd mentioned going to the Bighorn Mountains when I was a kid, and it carried on a little bit as I graduated high school. And I remember going out there one year, and I drank and ate OxyContin the whole way there. And about a day later, I couldn't sleep. I was shaking. I was sick. And I thought I had the flu, and I just couldn't figure it out. Nothing I did made me feel better. And ironically, I thought maybe if I had some marijuana, that maybe that's the issue. And I was on the way home, and it was like a light went off. I said, it's the pills. The pills are what made me sick. I want to take a moment to talk about withdrawal. And withdrawal is what propels the crime in addiction. The fear of withdrawal is what makes people do the desperate things. It makes them lie, cheat, steal, hurt. Everyone here has had the stomach flu. Everyone here has had a cold. Well, imagine the worst flu and the worst cold you've ever had and multiply that 20 times over, and you still haven't touched where opiate withdrawal reaches. And while your body is aching and hurting, and you just want it to stop, your mind is right there to tell you you can make it stop. Not only can you make this sickness stop, you can pull it 180 degrees the other direction, and you'll feel good. You'll be that Superman again. And so you do. You do what you have to do to get your quote-unquote medication and get back into it. Again, things are getting worse, and I was home for a weekend. My buddy and I, we are, again, drinking and driving around, and he got stuck. And, being the guy I was, I know I can pull him out. And as we're sitting there with two vehicles stuck together with a chain in the middle of South Dakota winter on a dirt road, a highway patrolman pulls up. And I just remember how angry I was. I wasn't driving. I was outside the vehicle when this cop pulled up, but he still had the audacity to give me a DUI. If he'd looked in the center console of my buddy's truck, he would have found a bag of marijuana and 3 different types of prescription painkillers. I wasn't lucky, I was mad. Again, the type of mentality that you have. And this one sent me into outpatient treatment. And when you talk about anger, I'll never forget going into that place and saying, you don't get it. This is my first DUI. I don't have to do outpatient treatment for this. And they said, no, this is your second DUI. Just because you pled it down to a DUI first doesn't mean that it isn't your second. And I just shook my head and kind of whatever. I'd go to class, I would drink before going to my alcohol classes. I would lie to complete my assignments. And it was all said and done, I'd go to the bar afterward. Remember one evening, the counselor had a big talk about how he knew that he could smell alcohol on people's breath when they came in for the outpatient treatment. And many of these people were on no drink orders, and he gave this big speech about how it was his obligation to turn them in. I remember after class, I went up to him, I said, go ahead, call the cops. I'm not under a no drink. And he said, I was just hoping you would listen. But there was nothing to listen for. I think this was October. About a month later, I was out at Thanksgiving in the Black Hills with my family again. While everyone played board games and was trying to have fun, I mean, at this point in time, I could see that their life was hurting because of me. I was passed out. I was snoring on the couch. And this snoring, I'm sure some of you health professionals in here know this, that's right there before you stop breathing. In fact, the other time I'd heard of this was when the people that I was getting my drugs from had a woman come to their home, party with them, and the next morning they went to wake her up and she was cold. She had passed away. When I heard this news, I'll never forget how scared I was. Not of the law, but what was going to happen to my dope supply. I had zero concern or compassion for this woman who was gone, for her family who grieved. My only thought was, how is this going to affect me? So I did what anyone would do. The guy who'd given her the pills, I asked him to move into a trailer house that I owned. So he moved in, I waved him in with one hand, and the other hand held out for a drug called methadone. And methadone is often used as a replacement drug for heroin addicts. And I'd mentioned my ability to look through the internet, and I remember him telling me that he had this methadone. And I said, no way, this isn't do it. This will not work. It won't get a guy high. It's what they give to addicts. Well, that first time I took it, there were 3 waves. I started to feel it, then I really felt it, and then it was just an, oh my God, where have you been all of my life? But regular doctors can't prescribe methadone, or they can, but it's very, very rare. So what I had to do was lie my way into a pain clinic. Now, pain clinics offer an amazing service to a lot of people. A lot of general doctors aren't able to handle pain. But they're also well known among the addiction community, the addicts, as where you go to get the good drugs. So I had a useless MRI. I had test after test, x-ray after x-ray, thousands upon thousands of needless doctor bills until I had finally gotten in there, finally got in and got my prescription. And it was 2 months. And I remember that second month, I had ran out of pills early. When I say early, I would get 90 pills and they'd be gone in 3 or 4 days. And I kept wanting to get off. I said, this time will be different. This time will be different. This brings us up to Thanksgiving, and it was gone. I had nothing. And I was trying to limp my way through school. Everyone knew what was going on except for me. I did not want to face it. And one day, I was walking home from class, dope sick, threw up on the sidewalk outside of our apartment, and I went in and saw my wife laying on the couch, sound asleep. And I hadn't slept in days. Withdrawal will do that to you. When your mind is telling you you need a drug and you're sick, you can't sleep. I broke down. I saw her, and I just wanted that peace. I just wanted to be better. And it was later that day that I checked into the Keystone Treatment Facility down in Canton, South Dakota. And I wish so badly that that was the end of the story. But as I got into treatment, again, I recognized, wow, I'm so much better than all these people here. They don't have it all together. I do. I remember one of the counselors saying that 60% would relapse, and I looked around the room picking who I knew for sure was going to relapse. They couldn't make it. They weren't me. So after I left treatment, I remember having those feelings of loneliness again. If I was going to get sober, I had to build a wall. I left Brookings. I left my old friends. And I'd never been so alone in my life. You know, I went from being the fun party guy, phone ringing all the time, tons of stuff to do, to being a prisoner in my own body. And I think I made it about 2 weeks before I finally found some more prescription painkillers. Made it a couple months before I hurt my back and was back in the doctor's office and working my way to get back into a solid monthly prescription that would last me a few days at least until I had to get more. And I always used to think that if I had all the pills that I wanted, whenever I wanted, that it would be okay, that I just need to have this. And that's what pushed me to do a lot of the things that it makes me sick to think about. My dad had open heart surgery. I knew he was gone. I knew he had pills at home. So I drove gravel roads, Brookings to Florence, parked because I didn't want my grandma to see me drive up there, ran through the pasture, opened up the dresser, pulled out the painkillers, and took them with me. A few days later, he gets home and is describing to me how he can feel his sternum grinding against each other and why I took his pills. And I couldn't lie. No, I'm just kidding, I could. I said, well, Dad, my neck, it just hurts so bad. I figured you'd get more. He said, I don't care. You bring those back to me. And I don't know if he knew they were gone. I certainly knew they were long gone. But in trying to maintain my facade, I went back into the doctor, got shot down once, went to student health, got shot down again. Finally, the third try, got to a doctor, was able to run my ruse and get a prescription of hydrocodone to replace the ones that I'd stolen. You'll never guess what happened. I took them back, gave them to my dad, and I might have gone back and taken most of them myself. Now getting back to when I was after my first stint in rehab. When you're addicted, your mind goes to the places where you can find the prescription painkillers. And it just breaks my heart to think about it. See my grandpa here tonight and know that I would ride my bike over to his house so I could go in his cabinet and take prescription painkillers. And as much as that hurts, him calling me the next day and telling me to bring him back was the best thing that ever happened. Because I finally had realized that it isn't. I can't use drugs and be okay. I can't continue the cycle that I was going on and have people trust me. So it was after that I found a doctor who would listen to what I want. I didn't have to manipulate him. I could just be honest and have him help me out. And I got through withdrawals. And to this day, with the help of a drug called Suboxone, I've been able to maintain my sobriety. Now, a lot of people, medical professionals, have questions, but all I can say is I don't get high. I don't cheat. I don't steal. I don't lie. I went from no job and using drugs to having a solid career, to a family. I've got 2 beautiful kids. And all of this is due to being sober, to not being in that cycle of addiction. I want to read something from, well, he's a rock star. I'm sure many of you guys are familiar with the Red Hot Chili Peppers, but anyway, their lead singer, Anthony Kiedis, is a recovering heroin addict. And there's a song called Under the Bridge that he wrote. His best friend and lead guitarist had passed away. But anyway, he says, that song came about because during the course of my life, I was what you might call a hardcore junkie for many years. Everything that was beautiful, precious, and sacred to me took a back seat. My need for chemical dependency became more and more disgusting and insane. And after years of sobriety, everything that was beautiful and sacred that I had lost has come back to me more deeply than I could ever have hoped for. During that time, I reached some ultimately low depths of incomprehensible demoralization, which are very much in my memory, and the big part of this is loneliness. And that's something that every drug addict can relate to, is this overwhelming sense of loneliness that you're trying to fill up with whatever you can find. And I think that just says a lot. Addiction is a lonely place. It's a place you don't want to be, but a place you end up, and you're afraid to leave because it's all you know. And another thing I want to touch on is what he talked about, everything that you held sacred and beautiful taking a back seat. You do. Any sense of pride, there's no low that you won't stoop to get your drugs. But when you can push that behind you, those things that are sacred and beautiful in your life, they do come back. They come back further and in more impressive ways than you can even fathom. In a lot of the 12-step programs, they talk about happiness beyond your wildest dreams. And while I often thought that was just a cliche, it isn't. It's the truth. You know, I'm not a rock star. I'm not anyone famous. I'm a dad. I'm an employee. I'm a son. And that is happiness. Being loved. Having people trust me. People that have no right to trust me for the things that I've done to them. Earning their trust back. And I don't want to push on this too hard, but in the 12-step programs, they always talk about a higher power. And I was an atheist for many years. I was so angry with God. It's interesting, isn't it? Something that's not real, but you can still be angry with it. And it was one of those things, again, where I knew better. I was smarter, okay? Maybe God should listen to me. When I was in treatment, I received a letter, and it was nothing but scripture. And I just wanted to take a pen and write all the nasty words I could think of and send it back. But I didn't. And as I progressed through my recovery, things were going well, but something was missing. And much, again, like the Lord has planned for us, He put me in the hands of some of the best people I've come across in my life. And they gave me a chance and an opportunity. And they showed me that trust and belief in God will bring you happiness farther and beyond your wildest dreams. And I know how tough this is for addicts to hear. And I'm not going to sit here and proselytize. People have to find their own way. You've got to find something higher than you, something you can hold on to, something beyond friends and family that can give you a reason, that can be there to support you when you think there's nothing else that can. So we get to today. Like I said, I'm an employee. Show up to work every day for the most part. I suppose I do have vacations. But again, I can be counted on. My kids. I'm home at night. I'm not down at the bar. I'm not driving across the state to get drugs. I spend time with my family. The things I love to do the most, When it used to be going to the bar with my friends, now I'd like to drive out to my parents' farm, grill some steaks, listen to the wind blow. You know, and hunting is a big part of my spirituality as well. And being outside and being in creation, it isn't that same high that I got from the prescription painkillers, but it's more satisfying because it's real and it lasts. And you can't put that in a pill. It only comes through life, through belief. I want to give just a couple final notes on addiction. A lot of people say to addicts, you know, you need to love your wife more than these drugs. You know, love your kids more than these drugs. And addicts do. Addicts would do just about anything to get rid of those pills. But it's more than a light switch. It's more than just stop. Okay? Addiction attacks your body, your mind, and in my experience and opinion, your soul. If this is something we're serious as a society about taking care of, then we're going to have to think outside the box. Everyone in here, in some way, shape, or form, has had addiction affect their life. And with what we know and what we have, the problem, sadly, is only getting worse. We have to be honest and recognize what these drugs can do and that they do affect anyone. More jails and harsher punishment are not going to prevent or stop addiction. Now, in the same breath, neither will unlimited second chances. We have to find a line where addicts can have some hope, that their lives aren't destroyed, but at the same time, that they can't continue to use without any sort of repercussions. The fear of withdrawal, I've used words to describe it, but you can't. You cannot imagine what a person goes through. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. Getting an addict through withdrawal, opiate withdrawal, is critical, but that isn't the end of the line. That's where it starts. It starts with getting them off of their drug and then teaching people how to live without it. And lastly, and I hate to say this, but recovery takes a lot longer than it does to get addicted to prescription painkillers. And talking to the kids about addiction, I've mentioned my just say no childhood. I don't think that works. I think we need to be honest. Now, at the same time, I'm not going to tell my kids every bad thing that I've done. I'm not going to glorify it or vilify it or lie. But again, it goes back to the truth. What is actually there and what can really happen. You know, what can we do if your friend is addicted? What can you do if your parents are addicted? I wish I had the answers for these, but it starts with having the conversation and talking about it. We cannot pretend that addiction will just resolve itself. I don't know anyone who can use heroin, prescription painkillers, and then all of a sudden one day just stop. Maybe they're there, but I certainly haven't found them. And again, when I talk about how much I love my kids, it grips me at times to think, you know, my little boy and girl, they might have that in them too. And how do I stop it? You know, certainly aspects of addiction can be genetic, but there isn't one thing that narrows it down. It's something that we all have to be aware of. And that while addiction and addicts must be responsible for their recovery, blame and shame won't put an addict into sobriety. It won't get them into treatment. It might start, but again, I talked about there's getting clean, and then there's finding sobriety and happiness. They're two wildly different things. You know, I talked about Suboxone being a drug that has helped me. I have a friend, the one who I'd drive out to do OxyContin with out in the Black Hills, and I wanted to help him. So I got him in to see my doctor, got him on this drug. No, he stashed it. He kept using OxyContin, heroin, whatever he could find, Then when he was in withdrawal, then he'd fall back on these. It was there that I realized that there isn't a silver bullet. An addict has to want to get clean for themselves and by themselves. As I stand here thinking, I wish I had better answers to solve this problem, but I don't. All I do know is that it's about to get a lot worse. You see, when I first started using and went through my addiction, I hadn't just on a very few times come across fentanyl. I'm sure many of you have heard of this drug because it's been in the news, but being manufactured down south, across the ocean in China, and this drug is powerful, and you don't need much. And I think of when I was using, a lot of it was the cottage industry, friends of friends of friends. Well, we're seeing the cartels take over in this prescription painkiller game, and it's been there, but it's getting a lot worse. So with your kids, have the conversation and know that there isn't anything they can't tell you. Fight with love, fight with truth. In my little bio, I wrote, "The truth will set you free." Biblical expression. My dad, in a letter he sent me in treatment, had that in there. I never got what it meant. Maybe I still don't. But what it means to me is that I am true. I can live my life without lying. I don't have to hide. I don't have to live in fear that my lies are going to catch up to me the way they had in the past. The truth will set you free. I thank you all for coming out this evening.
Thank you, Lucas. And he'll be able to answer questions as well. I just want to get an opportunity for our panel to introduce themselves. I'll have them go down and say who they are, and then also highlight what they're hearing or seeing in their field of work. And then we'll open it up for questions. And so we'll have about 40 minutes to do that, and then we'll conclude with the evening. So, Deb, I told you wouldn't start, but I lied. Or do you want me to start with law enforcement? It could kind of be the process here a little bit.
I'm Deb Hammer. I'm the coordinator.
Nope. I might have to get turned on.
I'm Deb Hammer. Can you hear me? Is it coming through? Okay, I'm the coordinator of Serenity Hills Halfway House and Detox Center here in Watertown. We serve people who are generally dual diagnosis, mental health and addiction. We also have our detox facility. Our halfway house is 16 beds. Our detox is 4 beds. We serve the male population for our halfway house, male and female for detox. The things that we're seeing, many of the things that Jared, Lucas, I wrote down the wrong name. Okay, that he talked about. We're seeing some of the trends. We usually have about, I would say 30 to 40 at least % of our clientele. They're cross-addicted, but many of them use opiates. Our detox facility, we are seeing about that rate of detox. It's a cross between a mixture of methamphetamine, opiates, alcohol, different prescription drugs. So anyway, the trends we are seeing is many of our residents, and this has been going on for a long time in detox, where people come into detox to detox from whatever drug, whether it be meth or opiates or whatever. And we hear a lot of, like he said, the ailments that are made up. I've never seen so many 20-year-olds that have fibromyalgia and ADHD and back pain and neck pain, knee pain, and those types of things. It's a constant. I met with a few of our residents that their primary diagnosis for addiction is opiates just recently, and asked them just to kind of share with me, you know, online you can get lots of information. I've been doing this for a long time, so I know something about opiates, and I know about addiction and the withdrawal and all of that. And it is, I mean, that's what I understand. It's like the worst flu you ever had. But we do see people frequently get through that withdrawal with the medications that we use, which isn't much. But we treat the symptoms. We treat the headaches and the nausea and the aches and the pains, and usually within 48 to 72 hours that has subsided. But anyway, what they shared with me is, you know, I know that South Dakota is not ranked high in the epidemic of opioid use and destruction just yet, but we're on our way. They were sharing, just like was said earlier, about there's not a lot of pain clinics in South Dakota, so they're more creative. They apparently will hang out at ERs and doctor's offices. They prey on veterans because they know that veterans get larger amounts of the opioid prescription, whichever it may be, than a doctor that's, you know, like normally it's 30 to 90, but with veterans they get larger amounts. They listen all the time. They're listening at work. They're listening at family gatherings. They're listening for when people are going to have surgeries or if they have injuries, and so they will, you know, prey on that. Obviously, the medicine cabinets, the purses. It was rather interesting to talk with them. The one thing that I got from them that I hadn't given a lot of thought to is the dark web. That's something that apparently you can get large amounts of opiates on the dark web at a reasonable price. I think it was $5,000 for $250, and they sell them for, you know, $10 a piece. So those are the trends that I think we need to look at and figure out how we're gonna deal with. You know, they talked about how they could pay $3 to $5 and then sell them for $10, and how lucrative it is and how it has to be that way because many of them are supporting their own habit plus trying to make a living. So the good news is I think we have some programs here in South Dakota that are monitoring a lot of that, and with us being a long program, most of the people that come to us on our halfway house have completed treatment, and then they're with us from 6 months to a year. It is a nasty addiction, and it takes a long time for the brain to make those changes. Getting through the withdrawals and getting through the treatment is a piece of cake compared to the long-term changing in the brain to get comfortable with not using. It's a complete lifestyle change. So, and there's different therapies. Earlier, when the Suboxone was mentioned, that replacement therapy is something that's happening now, and there are a few doctors that do it in South Dakota. Unfortunately, I didn't want to mention that we have also had people in detox for Suboxone because it sometimes can be abused too. So they can choose to abuse whatever's out there. So with that, I will pass.
I'm Sarah Spilding. I'm the Director of Pharmacy at Prairie Lakes Healthcare here in Watertown. I've been a pharmacist for 10 years. I've been at Prairie Lakes my entire time. I've been the director there for a little over a year now. Before my taking over as the director, I've worked in the hospital setting as well as the retail setting that we have at Prairie Lakes. I thought it was kind of important that I might start out with what the definition of an opiate is. They're a class of drugs. They include the illegal drug heroin and synthetic opioids such as fentanyl and pain relievers. that are available legally by a prescription. So oxycodone, Oxycontin, hydrocodone, which you will hear it, Vicodin, Norco, Lortab, codeine, morphine, Dilaudid, and many others. They're all chemically related. They interact with the opioid receptors on nerve cells in the body and the brain, and they're generally safe if they're taken for a very short period of time and when prescribed by a doctor for a real purpose. But because they produce the euphoria that Lucas was talking about, they can also cause addiction. So not only do they provide pain relief, but this is where they start to get misused. There's some scary statistics I'd like to share about the opioid epidemic in America, which is really considered the worst man-made epidemic in modern medical history. 91 Americans die every day from an opioid overdose. This includes prescriptions and heroin. In 2015, 12.5 million people misused opioid prescriptions. 21 to 29% of patients prescribed opioids for chronic pain will misuse them. 8 to 12% develop an opioid use disorder. And 4 to 6% who misuse opioid prescriptions will transition to heroin. So why is that? Most typically, heroin will be cheaper and easier to find. And 80% of heroin addicts will tell you that they started with the misuse of an opioid prescription. The United States constitutes for 4% of the world population, but we consume 80% of the global supply of opioids and 99% of the hydrocodone. So your Vicodins, your Norcos. The economic impact is huge, $78.5 billion a year to society, and that's healthcare costs, lost productivity, treatment for addiction, criminal justice involvement. And so I'd like to share just one, this is kind of the statistics I gave are just for the United States in general. And I think sometimes everybody thinks that we're immune here in South Dakota. We're a small town, we're rural. In July of 2017, there were 18,795 prescriptions filled for Vicodin, so the hydrocodone combination acetaminophen, just in South Dakota. There were 1,191,680 tablets dispensed for a total of 239,233 days supply. That was in just 1 month. So if you think we don't have a problem, we do. In 2015, there were enough opiates prescribed in South Dakota to medicate every adult in the state for 24 hours a day for 19 days straight. So why did this happen? Back in the 80s and 90s, there were a lot of industry-funded campaigns that supported greater use of these types of medications. But we in healthcare were considered pain as the fifth vital sign. Patients shouldn't have any pain. I also feel, we have become a society of instant gratification. We want a quick fix for everything, and not much accountability sometimes to go with it. There was an educational message that opioid addiction are rare in pain patients, they can easily be discontinued, and that they are safe and effective for chronic pain. So what were the results? Increased use of opioids for non-cancer pain starting in the 90s. More and more prescriptions are written with increased number of day supply at higher doses. A lot of social acceptance. It's a prescription. It must be safe. My doctor prescribed it for me. Storage of prescriptions in accessible areas to friends and family. Imbalanced doses, too many pills and too many days supply. So all of the above has kind of led to this increased addiction and overdose. And, it affects people of all walks of life. While there's socioeconomic factors that'll play a role in, who may have a higher chance of getting addicted, it does not discriminate. People who abuse opioid prescription drugs can be anyone. Your child, I think, Lucas talked about this, your spouse, your friend, your parents, your grandparents, your stay-at-home mom, your teachers, your factory workers, lawyers, doctors, nurses. You name it, it can get you. So what do I see at my work? I've seen a lot of very creative patients. They work the system. They're really good at it. You'll see patients that, they doctor shop, like Lucas said, they go and go and go till they find somebody that will give them a prescription. They will forge prescriptions. They'll use every excuse in the book as to why they ran out, why they need something early. Patients with legitimate need for medications have them stolen from family members and friends. And quite often, people will fill their prescription, not even use it, but they will fill it and they will sell them because it's lucrative. People pay a lot of money for them. So in the pharmacy, dispensing narcotics is actually heavily regulated by the DEA. At any given time in the hospital and the retail pharmacy, you need to have an exact real-time inventory of all your narcotic or controlled level 2 substance. We're using the PDMP or the Prescription Drug Monitoring Program more. Doctors are using it more. I think this has, helped out when people come in and, you kind of see a red flag. It allows me to look on there and I can see every prescription, narcotic prescription that's been filled by what doctor on what day. Physicians can see this as well. So if you went and filled it 5 times in 10 days, we can see that, and that always, then it warrants a phone call. We call the Board of Pharmacy with suspicious, or behavior, drug-seeking behavior. I think the use of e-scribing, where prescriptions go basically kind of like an email to a pharmacy, helps things out because it skips that paper where patients will, try to steal prescription blanks and write themselves prescriptions. I highly encourage everyone to take their narcotics or any unused prescriptions to the sheriff's office. I think the department will talk about this a little bit, but even they have a place you can go during business hours all the time to get rid of unused narcotics. Prescription benefit managers for insurance companies are starting to kind of crack down on this. So basically they'll limit the amount of opioids you can fill on your prescription. And if you get a prescription for 60 and they say you can only have 30, those other 30 will be null and void. You cannot go refill those. We don't fill prescriptions early, no matter how many times you call the pharmacy. So what can you do? Be accountable. When you go to the doctor and they prescribe something like this, know why you're taking these medications, what you're taking it for, how you're supposed to take it, how long you're supposed to use it, and find out, there are a lot of other things you can use for pain relief besides narcotic medications. Even things like Tylenol, anti-inflammatories like Advil, ibuprofen, sometimes even like antidepressants can be used to treat nerve pain, and they're often way more effective than an opioid. Physical therapy, it's a great alternative that can help manage and treat pain effectively. And there's also other modalities, hot, cold, massage, range of motion, exercise. And again, I just like to talk about the importance of disposing of unused narcotics. It's especially important that, a fentanyl patch is typically going to be on a cancer patient, but to know how to dispose of them when you take them off of yourself or a patient, to fold them in half, the sticky side together, and flush them down the toilet. Do not throw them in the garbage. There is drug remaining in those that not only will drug seekers look for, but those can actually be fatal to pets and children if they get a hold of those in the garbage. Don't store them in the bathroom or in the medicine cabinet or on the kitchen table. Drug seekers know right where to look for these places, and your family and friends will go through your medicine cabinets and search these out. The only other thing I wanted to mention about is, we're talking about the opioid epidemic, but there are a lot of other prescription drugs that are highly abused and to watch out for. The benzodiazepines, which are usually used for anxiety, so your Ativans, your Valiums, your Xanax, your Klonopins, your sleepers. So, that Ambien you take to sleep at night is, if you have a drug seeker, they're going to seek that out. Tramadol has become big. And then the ADHD drugs, so your Adderall and your Vyvanse, those are also highly abused. So just like, Lucas said, most people, they can't stop this, you can't stop this addiction, you need help. It's a complicated mechanism of action, how the drug addiction works and how the withdrawal works. So, if someone you know or love you think or suspect is addicted to an opioid, know they need help. They can't stop on their own. And they need, treatment centers. I think that's one thing we're really lacking. And, help to get off the drugs, to alleviate the withdrawals, to allow them to start recovering.
Good evening. Marty Jackley, your Attorney General, and I'm here tonight with Sarah Rayburn, who's in the back there at the Project Stand Up. That's a new program that I'm going to talk to you a little bit about tonight that has an educational component and an enforcement component. And then Brian Gortmaker, the Director of DCI, is also with us tonight. The question comes up is, do we have a drug epidemic? And the answer is, of course we do. I mean, if you were to survey everybody in this room and everybody, frankly, in South Dakota, we all, including me, have a loved one, a friend, a relative that's suffering from addiction. It's happening everywhere across our nation. The meth epidemic has hit us hard in South Dakota. It hit Montana even harder. It's hit North Dakota. It's in the Midwest. When you look at the opioid problem, I mean, when you've got the approximately 50,000 deaths, it's not here yet, but it's coming. We average 40 to 50 deaths a year in South Dakota from accidental drug overdose. We know when you look at some of the national charts that we rank 49th out of 51, but we also know that that doesn't necessarily include the black market, which is, from a law enforcement and public safety side of it, very concerning. And what I mean by black market is, she did a great job of talking about the prescription drug monitoring program. We know that doctors prescribe and pharmacists dispense legally about 1.1 million of the top pills a year. But then there's that black market where you order it over the internet. It's those cases you hear on the radio or you read about in the paper, that 20,000 fentanyl pills by a 19-year-old. Unfortunately, law enforcement caught it before they were distributed, but there's a tremendous amount of opioids and prescription drugs that don't go through a pharmacist or a doctor, and they're coming into our state, and they're being distributed to young kids. We're talking middle school, high school. It's serious. So what are we doing about it? Nationally, law enforcement and the attorney generals are pushing hard back about something to happen on our southern borders. In other words, the meth that you see in Watertown, that we see across our state, primarily comes from the southern border. It's not manufactured here. We have a few cases, about half a dozen a year where it is, but it's coming from our southern border. And on the prescription side, we attorney generals are investigating Big Pharma. I want to be fair, we're investigating them. We don't know those results yet, but we're looking into what they've said and what they're doing. And there'll be that component where we will unite as a group of law enforcement officers across the nation and address that side of it. But what we can do here today, and I want to encourage you to visit the Stand Up booth. Project Stand Up really has two components to it. The most important part is the education part. I mean, I say when it comes to economic development and the moral thing to do, it's prevention. Prevention is a lot cheaper and a lot more effective than treatment or prosecution. Prosecution's expensive. Nobody wins when we have to investigate somebody, prosecute them. You have to pay for their lawyer, you have to pay for the judge, you have to pay for the jail or the penitentiary. Families are hurt, kids lose dads, moms. It's not a good thing. And so there's a component, that education component. Please grab the brochures, the signs. We'd like to get in your schools and talk to kids about the dangerousness of drugs. That's Project Stand Up to kind of help with that. The other component of Project Stand Up is essentially we are deputizing every one of you to help us. Project Stand Up has an anonymous texting, and I can't emphasize it enough. It's anonymous, which means I don't know, your sheriffs, your chiefs don't know when you text drugs to the number 82257. For heaven's sakes, if it's an emergency, call 911 and they'll take care of it. But there are certain instances when maybe you have a loved one and you're hurting for them and you want to help them, but you need to be anonymous. Or maybe it's you're just scared. Maybe they're your neighbor and you're afraid they're going to do something to you if they find out you're involved. This is anonymous. I won't know you said it. Nobody in law enforcement knows. It's a third-party server. But if you text drugs to 82257, over 350 people in South Dakota have done that already. This program's only been in existence since late May. We have identified over 250 individuals in 43 different counties, including this one. We've already begun rolling out the arrests that we're making. And when we talk about it's not just enforcement. When we make arrests, I mean, and Lucas said it best, it's a fine line between you can't give people too many second chances, but you can't throw everybody in jail. And that fine line we're working through in public safety, we're working through it with drug courts, we're working through it with hope courts, with DUI courts, talking about statewide treatment opportunities. So there are things that we're doing, and we're doing a better job than we did before. You're doing an excellent job in this community with the Reach Center. We just recently executed a search warrant in the area, and a bunch of kids got to go there for child advocacy. And so there are programs and things that are happening. I want to encourage you, please go to Project Stand Up, grab the materials. Also go to nomethever.com. And these aren't just law enforcement projects. This is law enforcement teaming up with healthcare, teaming up with educators, with the community. Go to nomethever.com, watch some of the videos. One of them is made up by the 2 Augie students. Probably, I've been chairman of the nation's AGs, and I have to sit through a lot of videos on drugs. That one's probably one of the best. Take a minute, 30 seconds, watch that video. It's really good. And sign up and grab that literature. And if you know of somebody in the community that you love, that you care about, I mean, the alternative is if you sit back and do nothing, they're likely going to die or hurt somebody or hurt themselves. If you do something, if you text drugs to 82257, you can make a difference, and please do so. Thank you.
My name is Carmen Means, and I am one of the circuit court judges who presides over court here in Watertown. I currently preside over the criminal docket. I preside over the juvenile docket. I handle a number of other kinds of cases as well. I want to say, as somebody who participated both in the Meth Town Hall meeting and this meeting, I am gratified to see so many people here today. I think we all knew when we organized the Meth Town Hall meeting that methamphetamine was a serious problem in our community. I don't know that that awareness is as high for what we are experiencing with the opioid epidemic. So I'm glad that people are taking the time to learn about this and to do what they can to help participate in the solution. As a circuit court judge, I would continue to say, I think as I did 6 months ago, that the overwhelming number of cases that I see are still methamphetamine cases. However, there are trends that allow me to see that the opioid problem is an increasing one here in Watertown. I do see opioid cases on an increasing level. And it's one of those things where, as a judge and having contacts with law enforcement, I know it's coming. I know it's a problem that has the potential to grow here in Watertown and here in South Dakota. I feel a little bit, as a circuit court judge, that I echo what Lucas said at the beginning of his speech. From my perspective, addiction is addiction, and I don't treat, as a judge, opioid cases any differently than I treat methamphetamine cases or any other addiction type cases. And so for me, I am somebody who believes in second chances and doesn't believe in incarceration to treat addiction. There are times when addicts do need to be sent to the penitentiary, and I have to make those judgment calls. But typically, that is only after they have amassed numerous cases or numerous probation violations. From the new things that we're doing to try to monitor things, we do also use the prescription drug monitoring program. Our probation officers have access to that. And so for all of the people who I sentence involving addiction, I order as a condition of their probation that they disclose all prescription medications that they receive to their court service officer, and then that can be monitored through the monitoring program. I would say some of the notable concerns that I want to talk about are my concern about the attitude of our young people as it relates to prescription medication. I do think that our young people are uneducated about that. I'm glad that there are things such as Project Stand Up that can get some of that education piece into our schools. I had a young man appear before me in juvenile court charged with ingesting, and he had essentially taken a prescription medication from a classmate. He had no idea what it was, and he had no clue whether it would have any effects on him at all. That case really brought home to me the scariness of that attitude toward, or that idea that if it's a prescription medication, it must be safe. And so that's, I think, the education piece that needs to happen. We have treated opioid addicts in our drug court, and I have felt that that has been successful. It can be difficult. Those addicts that are more kind of pill seekers are a little bit harder to monitor, but we have had some notable successes for people who had very severe opioid addiction, so I am proud of that piece. I'm also hopeful that Watertown will be a community very soon to have Hope courts, and Marty Jackley referenced those. Hope probation is just a different kind of probation that includes more random testing as part of, and more frequent random testing as part of probation. And if a probationer violates by testing positive for a substance, they then have to appear immediately in front of the judge and receive a sanction and receive some other education from the judge. That is a program that is gaining ground here in South Dakota, and there are a few communities who have that program, and I'm hopeful that Watertown will be one of those communities in the near future. It does take a lot of resources. It takes a lot of buy-in from our various agencies, but that's something I'm hopeful that we will be doing. And so I'm going to turn it over to Chad.
My name is Chad Stahl. I'm the Detective Sergeant for the Watertown Police Department. I was also here at the last meeting we had back in March. I'm just going to kind of give you a little bit of an update, seeing as how that's was predominantly meth that we had talked about back then. We do have what I would say is somewhat of an issue with prescription pills here. I spent many years investigating drug crimes, and a lot of those are going to be like your doctor shopping crimes and your people that are out seeking pills. Currently, though, I want to say as of August, I think we're still averaging for the Watertown Police Department like 71 arrests per month for drug-related crimes. That's going to be marijuana, methamphetamine, pills, and those sorts of things. So those numbers are still fairly high. But when we get back to the doctor shopping sorts of things, I hate to say it, but those are the crimes that we don't really put a lot of time into, because they used to be very time consuming. With the prescription monitoring program now, it makes it a little more simple. But years ago, we used to have to go through the pharmacy board and talk with a gentleman out in Pierre, and he would have to contact the suspected pharmacies that we thought these people would be going through. So he would have to send things out to the pharmacies, and then we would get the information back. So it was quite a time-consuming process. But I think the angle that we need to go with this is we in law enforcement, treatment, and the courts, we need to get together with the medical field and actually give training and work more closely with the doctors. Because when we do see these cases come through, and we'll run the prescription back for a year or whatnot on the individual, we can see that this person has seen a doctor in Watertown, they've seen a dentist in Watertown, they've been to the emergency room in Millbank. They may have prescriptions that they've gotten in Minnesota but filled back here in South Dakota. So those are the things that I think we really need to take the time and educate and communicate more freely with doctors. We know when we go to the doctor's office, they're quite busy, and it takes an extra step, and it takes a little extra time in order to get these profiles back, and the people may already be gone, so that can't be addressed at that time. I don't want you to think that we don't communicate at all, but there is some communications with some doctors in our area, but I think that is a step that we could really take and do some education there and really get on the same page. I also learned that there are other steps I think we can take to try and potentially limit the amount of opiates that are produced in the country as far as prescribed, because there's a much farther in-depth look into that and where the control of the production actually comes from. So those are just a few things that I think we as a community could take and really kind of, instead of saying we have a problem, let's try and find a solution to this problem. Let's try and get out in front of it. And those are just different aspects that I think we need to take here. And it isn't our job just as law enforcement to arrest people and write them a ticket and put them in jail. It's our job to actually do a thorough investigation and find out why. Try and get to the root of what's going on. I do want to let you know we have the drug take back coming up this Saturday. That'll take place at the lobby of the police department from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. So if you do have any unused or unwanted medications, you can bring those down. It's a no questions asked sort of thing. You bring them in, you put them in the box, and we will dispose of them. We do that once a year. Sometimes we do it twice a year, depending on time permitting. And those are just a couple of the steps that we can take. I do know that she had mentioned down there about flushing your fentanyl patches down the toilet. Believe it or not, that is an acceptable thing, and if you go on the Food and Drug Administration website, there are a few drugs that they say should be immediately flushed once you no longer need them. Other drugs, if you are unable to take them in and dispose of them properly, there are other steps that you can take as well. You take your pills and you put them in a plastic bag, put some liquid in there, and then you mix them with either dirt, kitty litter, coffee grounds, those sorts of things, seal the bag up, and then you put that in the trash. And then when you throw your prescription bottle away, make sure you scrape all your personal information off of that as well. But there are steps out there that you can take in order to try and get rid of those pills and unwanted prescriptions if you can't get into a drug take-back program. And I'll let Mike talk about their program they have over there. Thank you.
Mike Gupka, I'm a sergeant with the Cottington County Sheriff's Office. We do, like Chad was saying, we have the prescription take-back program in the lobby of the Sheriff's Office during any business hours that the Sheriff's Office is open, that is accessible to the public. Just to give a good estimate, about every 6 months we bag up about 80 pounds of pills dropped off to the Sheriff's Office and send back to be destroyed or reappropriated where they need to be. That's potentially millions of pills by the end of this program that potentially came off the street or getting into a child's hands. And you know, it's one way that we are trying to be proactive to keep our community safe, or at least get them unused pills or unneeded medications off the streets so they can't be stolen. Chad would be able to speak for this as well, that a lot of the crimes that we deal with are in relation to feed some sort of addiction, may it be opiate or methamphetamine, whatever it may be. Burglary probably stem back to stealing some items to sell later on to purchase said drugs that they're addicted to. It's one of those things where I think South Dakota has been proactive by implementing that PDMP or prescription drug monitoring program for law enforcement and other agencies to use to kind of keep tabs on people that are potentially doctor shopping. The other side of it now, you know, as a sheriff's office, we deal with the jail. We do allow certain medications into the jail on a controlled basis where they're disseminated through certain times and whatnot like that. But people will still attempt to abuse those said narcotics inside our jail system. So, I mean, you can take the person out of the addiction realm, but the addiction will stay with them until they actually get the help that they need. If, you know, they're writing 71 arrests, or they're writing up 71 arrests for drugs on a monthly basis, you know, we're a much smaller department, but we're still putting out quite a few arrests on our side. And a lot of them are coming from programs that we prorate to be fitting for drug users, like the 24/7. And, you know, when they fail UA, they could potentially seek charges from the court systems. So, I mean, we're getting UAs probably twice, 3 times a week from failed 24/7 people coming in, providing a urine sample, and then us testing it. So, I mean, it's the epidemic. It starts from the top where they get it from the pharmacy and comes all the way into our jail. I mean, and like Chad said, meth is definitely a problem, and it's easily concealable. Same thing with pills. So it makes our job a whole lot harder. And it's not our goal is to put people in jail. We want to see people get help and obviously be back out in the community and be productive and a good citizen, because that's going to be a lot easier on everybody. So I'm not going to take up too much time because I want you guys to be able to ask questions, and they took a lot of the wind out of my sails. So I'm going to turn it over to Kelly.
All right, so with that, do we have people who have some questions for our panel or for Lucas? And if you raise your hand, I can come to you, or if you have a sticky note that you want me to read, I can do that too.
Can I make a comment for Lucas?
You can make a comment.
Just a little backstory. I actually know Lucas outside of law enforcement. I want to be clear on that. What Lucas did here today for everybody is extremely humiliating and humbling. I hope you guys see the value in that. I've known Lucas 10 years plus now, and I would have never guessed before this day that he was an addict for any pill or anything out there. Now, I knew he liked alcohol when I worked with him prior, but what he did up here for everybody today was extremely humiliating. I mean, he told the worst of his worst. You can't ask somebody to do that and expect them to come forth and do what he just did. So value that as a very educational moment for everybody. So.
All right, well, I have a question that somebody left me, and this is for Judge Means. Seems like bond is set quite low. Can you explain?
I would say bond in drug cases is often set low. The factors that we are supposed to consider are ties to the community and whether somebody is a danger to the community. And controlled substance charges don't necessarily fit in either of those categories such that you would necessarily set bond high. We are also, here in Watertown and all across the state, we do have the 24/7 program, which allows us as a condition of bond to order that a person complete twice weekly urinalyses as a condition of their bond. And so we can set bond lower because then we have that assurance or that hope that people aren't using, and we can monitor that through their bond. And so if they do violate that condition of bond and have a positive urinalysis, then we can address bond again when that person comes back to court. So I do think bonds are set low. I think they need to be set low. Our jails are full as it is, and we should be keeping our jail space available for people who are violent in the community and people who are a danger or people who don't appear for court. So.
Thank you. Anyone else?
The dark web was mentioned, and places to get cheaper drugs. Is there no way to monitor those transactions or who's getting those mailings? Is there no way at all to monitor any of that information to try to catch those?
That's a great question on the monitoring, and so much of it depends upon where it is. There's a couple things at play that are going on nationally right now. A lot of the tech companies have their servers overseas, and they've taken a position that those servers are not subject to search warrants signed by a lawful judge. Many of us attorney generals disagree with that. In fact, if you want to learn more about it, you can go on the AG's website. I had joined in with several AGs to send a pretty stern letter against Microsoft, and they've taken that position. So a lot of the information is overseas and not available to us. There's also a law that Congress passed in 1996 that really limits law enforcement in certain areas when it comes to companies and what they're doing and dealing with state laws. So we've asked Congress to change that. So it's made it challenging. The reality is, and this is the same with the chief and the sheriff and the attorney general, our jurisdiction is really within the borders of our state. But I want you to be reassured that on a national level, we share information considerably through task forces, through federal authorities. But the challenge is most of the drugs that are coming in and causing us problems, the meth's coming from Mexico, and the pills are coming from China and elsewhere. And so we are having a lot of challenges being able to enforce on that, and that's why it goes back to prevention, 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 and then treatment, and then in the worst resort, the prosecution side.
And I'll tailor off of that. It's one thing to have the prevention part, but there's access to everything that's out there. There's websites dedicated to drug use, to teach people how to use drugs. And that's going to be the next battle too. It's easy enough to learn how to do it. and obviously we're trying to be proactive to keep people from doing it, but the worst enemy is right in front of our face most of the time, our smartphone. You access thousands and thousands of places on the web that can tell you exactly what drugs, legal or not legal, will do what if you take certain doses of it. I've been on websites that I could tell you, you can go to your local Walmart, Walgreens, whatever pharmacy it is, not even have to talk to the pharmacist and go get high. So there's far more than just this epidemic that's out there. There's very different issues on the horizon.
Absolutely, and my experiences, and I agree that the majority of my residents that have talked to me about this, so they do come from China, and the way they get on the dark web is kind of intricate also. And then there's also concern in researching. They have the fentanyl powder that's coming also, which is a concern, and it sounds like people are making medications that look like oxycodone and look like Xanax and look like, but they have fentanyl in them also, and I think that's some of the things that are killing some of our kids also. So it's, you know, it's difficult. I agree the prevention is but drug addicts are once you're caught up in it, it's pretty crafty. I did hear on Kellan last night that since the prescription monitoring program, that the prescriptions that and the education that the prescriptions medical doctors in South Dakota are writing for opiates and things like that have dropped 27%. So I thought that was that's a good thing. So.
I'm in the back. I'm coming.
I have two questions. One is that it seems to defy logic that the drug dealers are selling drugs that would, you know, kill the very people who would take the drugs. And I'm sure I'm just not creative enough to think of why they would do that. And the second question is, what kind of programs are available to all of the communities, not just Cottington County, but all of the communities, both for parents and for the kids? And I know DARE program exists. It doesn't exist where I don't think we have it in Willow Lake, but for the smaller communities that don't have the same resources as the bigger communities.
I'll answer that second question. As far as DARE goes, Watertown Police Department and Cottington County both do the DARE program. There's other programs out there other than DARE that can be established in different communities. What it comes down to is each community has to establish what they're willing to educate their people on and who's willing to do it actually. So it's not always easy to find the soldiers go out and actually do the classes and things like that. Luckily with DARE, law enforcement will do that, and most of the time law enforcement has a passion to hopefully prevent people from using drugs.
Then with respect to DARE, and I don't have any children, I have foster kids now, but I've never had actually any children. What is the success rate with that, and how would you, I guess, can you find out what a success rate is with a program that's a prevention?
Well, go ahead, Jim.
South Dakota, when it comes to DARE, we actually lead the nation. We train the trainer, so we have that information available at the office. There are really two different programs that exist in South Dakota, and they don't compete. They're parallel. They're good programs, and I would encourage, from a community standpoint, obviously DARE's in Cottington County. I have an 11-year-old daughter that went through the DARE program when she was 10. So did my son. It's a great program. Madison uses Empower. I would encourage you, if you're looking at the two programs, look at them both. So there's Empower and there's DARE. Project Stand Up is another one, and they all, again, parallel each other, but there's an educational component. 3 hours of coursework associated with Project Stand Up. So please, at the close of the meeting, go to that back booth and grab as much of that material as you want. And you ask the question is, why would drug dealers deal to people something that'll kill them? It's much like big tobacco. I mean, big tobacco sold cigarettes that was dangerous for years, and it's kind of the same concept. They're worried about making money right now. They're not worried about the people they're selling to.
And on that, with the DARE portion there, I am not a DARE officer, but we do have several. in our agency, and I've talked with them. And as far as measuring that, it's almost impossible to measure the success. But if you say there's one child who went through there that didn't use it or use drugs because of it, is that deemed a success at that point? Probably. So that's why it's tough to measure the success on that portion. And to touch kind of on your talk about drug dealers selling these sorts of things, I don't think anybody uses drugs with the intent that they're going to die or kill themselves. In my time, I have investigated a few crimes where the fentanyl patches is one that just sticks in my head. Nobody teaches these individuals how to consume this stuff illegally. We had a young man who I would probably call him a well-versed person in using drugs, thought it would be a good idea to smoke fentanyl. He didn't even lose the pen that he inhaled the fentanyl smoke into himself before he died. He died with that right in his hand, and he had no intent of doing that. It's just those drugs are so powerful, and they don't know what they're going to do to them. And we've had a few fentanyl deaths in Watertown over the past few years.
Another piece of that is just having to do with the nature of addiction. You know, when a person tries the drug, whether it's opiates or any other drug, they're usually seeking that same high they got the first time or the second time or the first week or the first month. And then the tolerance kicks in, and then it reaches a point where in order to just feel normal, they have a need for that drug, and opiates is one of those drugs that's truly that way, because they get sick if they don't have it. So then they need it and they need more. And I don't think the drug dealers are necessarily trying to, their intention is not to kill, but they do want to make it stronger and stronger, so the people that have developed such a tolerance and are using more will get that high that they're seeking, and when in fact they generally never do. And then, with the fentanyl patches, my understanding is that they smoke the gel, and then the transdermal kind, they soak those in vinegar and things like that to get so they are, I agree, they need to be disposed of in a complete way.
And the other thing that we never really touched on here, we kind of hinted around it, and it's implied here. The thing about opiates is if somebody's addicted to, don't think just a hydrocodone or something like that. If somebody's addicted to an opiate, any opiate itself will alleviate those withdrawal symptoms. Now, methamphetamine is different, cocaine is different, marijuana is different, alcohol is different, but opiates, any opiate can take those withdrawal symptoms away. So if an individual is taking a lower sort of opiate like a codeine, just something that's what they became addicted to, then the next thing you know, they're taking a high Oxycontin or morphine pill. They may have taken too much, and then they can overdose that way. So that's the kind of tricky thing with opiates is any opiate will alleviate those withdrawal symptoms.
And then they find out that the heroin is cheaper, and that's the next problem we have, is they just can't get it from the doctors, so then just because it's the same type of drug.
Right.
Same drug.
And I just want to be courteous of people's time, but I do want to address the prevention piece of it too. I work in the field of prevention, and sometimes prevention is overlooked, and they always seem that we find a means and a ways to do whatever we can to help our communities. And for me, I work in the Watertown specific area, but we have prevention resource centers located in the northeast corner, the southeast corner, and the western part of the state. And they have a network of free resources, curriculum material that any person, any organization, any school can utilize. And I actually have Dodie in the back. She's our prevention coordinator for the northeast part of the state, and so she'd be able to connect you with resources as well. But it's a network. We try to find the best means that we can to help schools, businesses, individuals to address whatever social issues are impacting your youth. So what a question? Okay, one quick question, and as we're doing that, if you take an opportunity to fill out the evaluation on your tables, and you can just leave them there, and then we'll end with Stephanie's question, and then we'll have more resources. We have our local resources here that you can walk around, visit, find out what we have available in the Watertown, Coddington area.
I'll try to be quick. It's kind of a three-pronged question, so please, whoever has the answer, respond. I know last year that South Dakota DSS main office was awarded $2 million grant, a federal grant for the use of Narcan. I'm wondering if Cottington County, or who specifically, if it's the police department, the EMS, or the sheriff's department, have access to that. And then also I'm wondering if anybody's concerned about an HIV issue with needle sharing with fentanyl, with all these different kind of crush incidences. And then lastly, I think somebody said that we have a limited number of drug treatment facilities in South Dakota. And I'm wondering if I know the dialogue of the Affordable Care Act is an issue as far as repeal and replacement, and how will that impact our citizens who are primarily without insurance to begin with?
To answer the first two, we were talking before about the limited facilities, but the Narcan, we actually just had a training here in town locally for individuals for the Narcan. As of right now, we're trying to train officers in the field with Narcan in case we get exposed. Obviously, we want to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves as well. And as far as HIV testing goes, you know, we have that available. If somebody gets incarcerated, that's something that is very easily available to them. All they have to do is put a request, and that's something that can be done. So, I mean, that availability for confirming or denying that HIV is available to them if they're in the system. It is something that you can go out and actually get in the community as well for any of those tests. It's very easy to obtain. So.
And I believe our local EMS is the one that actually carries it in the ambulances.
Yes, sorry.
The insurance, yeah.
Treatment facility availability. You know, it's a constant. I know our facility, we only have 16 beds, so we stay full most of the time. Detox, we usually have 1 or 2 beds. You know, there's limited funding for staff. And a lot of times our people will have to wait anywhere from a week to a month to 6 weeks to get into a treatment facility. You know, I field calls every day from somebody looking for a halfway house for a female, or, you know, treatment. So I think that's an ongoing problem probably with all states. And I don't know, and being in prevention, do you know the number of treatment facilities we have in the state? Dodie, are you the answer to that?
Dodie, do you know?
I know the core agencies.
Where'd she go?
Is
she hiding?
They're networking. Treatment facilities and things like that throughout the state. I mean, we have the resources. I mean, the PRCs have that collection of it, but just a guess? Yeah.
Well, it's the catchment areas, I think there must be about 15.
Oh, that'd be good. Yeah, Department of Social Services website, the behavioral health, would tell us what agencies are funded through state dollars for treatment facilities, but there's also private facilities as well. But it's a resource that we can pull together and find out for people as well. So
My guess is around 15 to 20.
Yeah.
Actually, you can go to nomethever.com. That's one I talked about earlier, and you can go specifically, it's got statewide, and then you can go to each county, and so you can pull that up on that website. So nomethever.com.
Does it list private and state funded?
I believe it does,
okay.
Yes.
Yeah, there's several areas that we can get them, but I think there's about 15 of those state funded, and then there's private. So anyway, you know, again, the key is to try to interrupt that cycle before they need the treatment too. But just, you know, I think that the HSA you have a table that has information where you can call if you are looking for something like that.
All right, I just want to be courteous of people's time. I know someone has another question, but if you feel you need to get up and go, please feel free to do that. Check out the resources that we have. We'll let this one question be, and then you guys, thank you for coming.
Knowing that there is such a high demand in the area, if you're saying some of your residents or clients take anywhere from 2 days to 6 weeks to get in for a facility. Is there any outward look of maybe creating more facilities or opening more facilities to help out?
I think that's always ongoing, where people are trying to develop more, get more facilities so that we can treat our people. I know there's a few new ones, and, I know Brookings is working on a halfway house also, so.
All right, thank you again. I'd like to thank our panel. I'd like to thank Lucas, Lake Area for allowing us to be here tonight, the Watertown Healthy Youth Coalition, and the community members coming tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly.
And please fill out your evaluation. That will help us to continue to do programs and activities like this.